Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to yet another episode of an Evolved Review. I'm your host, James Caleb Kitchens, and as always, oh, no, wait, not as always. Today I'm joined by none other than he's been on the show before. You may know him from the Superhero Homies podcast as Superhero Homie Q. You may know him from pro wrestling as Ace of Professional Wrestling, but I just know him as Ace. And that today, ladies and gentlemen, we have none other than Quinten Ace Ficklin on the show. Welcome back, man.
Thank you for having me on again, brother. And the Ball Review was actually one of my personal favorite podcasts. I myself have listened to every single episode now. I've recently just caught up on two that I were behind on. Very awesome show. I'm always happy to be a guest on, and thank you for having me back on here, brother.
Thank you, man. I feel like we just did this.
It's deja vu.
It is, yeah, a little bit deja vu. Just talking about people's favorite podcasts, the Superhero Homies is my favorite podcast. I've listened to so many hours of it from the very beginning. Been on a few times, and I did promise you that next time you came on here, I would have something that didn't involve anyone dying or any sort of tragic fall of any companies. Because every time I think all your previous ones have been Dark Side of the Ring, right?
Except for the last Rod Doc.
That's right. The
Yep.
Last Ride Doc was awesome. If you haven't checked that out, I loved our coverage of that.
Mhm.
But enough about this show for just a second. I want to talk about Superhero Homies. Like I said, I've listened to so many hours of it. Let everybody know kind of what you guys have coming up because I'm excited about it. I want to know. That's why I have you on the show. I need to get the sneak peek.
Hey man, well, first of all, let me say this. Maybe all those Dark Side of the Ring episodes that I was on is payback because I had you on for Endgame, where spoiler alert, Tony Stark dies and so many other people as well. So, maybe just a little bit of a payback there. But anyways, no. So what we have coming up is we will be talking about the Eternals. We're doing a preview episode about the Eternals. Who are they? What can they do? Where have they been? And we're also going to speculate about maybe what we can see in the movie, what some of the differences are, and just kind of what we can expect from the Eternals. So that's going to be our next episode. And then, of course, we're going to actually cover the movie when it comes out. And all of our movie covers are spoiler free for the first half, and then the second half is all spoiler filled.
And I really love that, man, because with some of the movies, like if I know you guys have to watch everything because you have the
Mm-hmm.
podcast, right? And it's kind of
Yeah.
like, do you know how many AEW pay per views I suffered through before it was good in the name of this podcast? So I feel you 100%.
I was gonna say I appreciate that, and I understand your pain.
Yeah. So if there's something that I'm on the fence about, which is rare with superhero stuff, right?
Right.
Like it's anything MCU, I'm usually immediately like turbo excited about it
Mm-hmm.
more than you sometimes.
Yeah.
Here lately, even more. That happens even more often. Uh, but that being said, it's like if I'm on the fence about something, man, I'll listen to you guys spoiler free half, and then if you guys convince me that it's worth my time and money, then I'll go see it and I'll come back and listen to the second half. So always love that. And I recently went and saw Dune and really loved it. And I was thinking about doing an episode on here about it, but I decided I'm probably going to wait until part two comes out whenever we get that. But the box office is looking really good for that. So hopefully I will get to do that episode, sometime in like season 14 of this podcast.
Right, bro. I've heard nothing honestly but really good things about Dune from people that I trust. And so that's one that I need to go see. I really like the director. I've seen quite a few of his previous films. So it looks great. I haven't actually seen the 84 original movie, nor have I ever read the books. So I'm going in with like very little knowledge or expectations.
Okay, listen. The only way you should watch the 84 David Lynch movie is if I come over there
Yep.
and then you and Kevin and I do a what happened episode, or you may need to steal some of Heath Mulligan's thunder. Shout out to the Double Dropkick Show. He has a series called "What Did I Just Watch," and that you may need to have your lawyers get in touch with his lawyers to see
Right.
if maybe there's a rights issue because it is atrocious, man. Like my roommate, is very into all things like he loves like all sci-fi. Like he's watched even like the really low budget kind of Stargate stuff. you know,
Oh yeah.
and he really likes all that stuff. And so he was like, "Man, this looks right up my alley." And I was like, "Well, the new movie probably will be," but I was like, "This movie is weird." And we sat down and we made it like halfway through that movie, and it was just like, I mean, I gave it a 1 out of 10,
God.
and the one was because Patrick Stewart is in it.
That bad?
I had to. I mean, I'm telling you, man. You just have to see it for yourself. I mean, it's so off the rails, you know. And seeing the new movie and the, you know, there's a couple things with it, right? It's like there's a huge technology difference,
Right.
but that does not make up for. I mean, when you're watching it, you kind of like just constantly tell yourself that this entire movie takes place, like this was all shot and edited after the entire original Star Wars trilogy had come out.
Yeah.
So there's like no excuse because those movies hold up perfectly.
That's true. That is a good point. Speaking of that, not to stay on this too long, but let me ask you this: for people who are uninitiated, do you think that maybe they would watch Dune and say, "Well, this just seems like it's trying to copy Star Wars"? Like, what would you say to that?
I would say that fear and theatricality are powerful tools, uh, especially to the uninitiated. But I don't think I think the novel predates Star Wars by quite a bit.
It does, yeah.
And I think I think anybody that says that, and I have heard a couple of people that are like, "Isn't this just trying to copy Star Wars?" I'm like, all right. So even if you don't know that the novel greatly predates Star Wars, um, you know, it's like you very much don't understand either property if you
Hmm.
think that, because it's like, oh, they both have a desert planet. Okay. You know, it's like,
Right.
it's those kind of things. You know, I don't want to give anything away about Dune, or stay on this tangent too long, but yeah, I mean, the main character does have some like powers and stuff, but I feel like it's a reach
Mm,
to try to say that they, you know, either one of them are copying each other's homework.
gotcha. And that's fair. It's just that a lot of people feel like they have to make comparisons in order to understand something or explain it to somebody else.
Right, it
Yeah.
happens.
Yeah.
You know, look at the entire creation of the Inhumans.
We don't have to.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I don't have a soundboard, so I can't put the buttons in there. But that being said, man, I want to get into kind of the meat of the episode here. Anybody that clicked on this, you know, while we're here today, we are here to talk about the. So it's kind of weird. It's a meta thing. So we're actually talking about a episode of another podcast. So recently, I've started getting into the Kurt Angle show, and the thing that really kind of got me into it, I had subscribed to it, but I hadn't listened to a lot of it. And then when I saw that he was going to have one of my favorite wrestlers of all time, Samoa Joe, come on the program for an interview, I said, well, I absolutely have to listen to this. And just for anybody who's watching this on any of our video platforms, Facebook or YouTube or soon to be Spotify, I did not intentionally make it look like Joe and Kurt were joining us on the show today. It just kind of worked out that way. So, because I wanted to use this is one of the photos that the actual show put up. So this is one of the ones I wanted to use. I wish they were here. That would be great. But if I had favors to call in with these guys, it would not be for this. So
Yeah, I was gonna be really flattered because when I first saw the screen pull up and I see Kurt Angle and Samoa Joe, I'm like, I don't know why you thought I was worthy to be on this episode.
I mean, it would have been the best prank, you know, ever.
Right.
To just, you know, I just am like, hey man, can you come on this episode? And then like you just pop in and they're just here. And then after the episode, they're just like, what was going on with your co-host, man? What's wrong with that guy?
Yeah.
Also, I don't think Caleb would ever forgive me
Oh,
if
absolutely not. No,
I had these two on the show and like he just wasn't here, you know?
he'd never forgive you.
No, absolutely not. Yeah, I couldn't do that to him. Um, so that being said, you know, what were your thoughts when I first sent you the link? Because this was out of nowhere. It's so weird for anybody to do like a review of another podcast. For one,
Yeah, so I ran through a few different thoughts when I first saw the idea for this episode. My first thought was I didn't know Kurt Angle had a podcast. My my second thought was, oh, this is an interview with Samoa Joe. That sounds really interesting. And my third thought was, you haven't asked me to do a bad episode yet. I don't see why this would be any different. So yeah, I was completely down for it.
That's true. It's definitely something that is as soon as I saw that there was an episode about it, I immediately knew I was going to be interested in this.
Yeah.
And so here we are. I got into his podcast kind of a little bit before this, but then this is when I started really listening to it and going back through the back catalog, and it's relatively new. I don't think he's even been doing it a year yet, so you're not too far behind.
Good. Yeah. From what I've seen and heard, I got some catching up to do, and I'll probably do that after this is over.
So that being said, man, what do you think about the kind of format of the show? As somebody who's done, how many episodes are you guys on now?
338.
Yes. So you have done probably, I would say, what, close to 500 to 600 hours of podcasting.
Yeah, that is fair.
So that makes
Uh,
it makes you at least a journeyman, I think.
yeah, at least at this point in the game, I'm like, man, I guess Kevin and I are friends. In order for us to do it this long together.
That's
Uh,
true.
but but as far as the formatting of this show goes, I really dig it because I think it's brilliant, actually. Um, and not to make this all about Conrad, but he really is kind of like he's like the guy who is steering the conversations in the right direction. He's kind of that guy for a couple of different wrestling podcasts, including JR's podcast. And the thing about Conrad is that every time you hear him speak, it's always with reverence and respect, and he's always kind of asking direct questions that are curious. And so I really dig like his position on the show, how he never overpowers what he knows people are listening for. He knows people are listening to hear Kurt Angle and Samoa Joe, in this respect. But every time you hear him, he's always there to kind of guide things in the right direction. So I dig the format.
Yeah, this is something that's actually come up in a discussion pretty recently. It's like in pro wrestling, everyone at ringside should be selling the action, right? So if you have, your ring announcer sitting there, your ring announcer shouldn't be sitting there staring off into the distance looking bored while there's a match in front of him. Your
Right.
photographer shouldn't be doing that. Your camera guy shouldn't be doing that. The referee certainly shouldn't be doing that. You want everybody around to look entranced by the product. You want them to be involved in the product because if they're off bored looking and they work there, then your audience is going to be on their cell phones. And it's the same thing with the way that Conrad does these podcasts. Is he always sounds and it's not hard to do it with the podcast that he's on because
Right.
everybody that he works with pretty much has some amazing stories to tell. But he always sounds so inquisitive and so interested. And that's what I like about him. And we all know that pro wrestlers love to tell stories. That's what pro wrestling is. And so it's very easy to get off on a long tangent like we just did just a minute ago and start talking about all sorts of stuff that maybe isn't relative to the topic at hand. So Conrad always manages, I think, to very seamlessly bring them back into the main topic of the conversation without it being jarring for the listener.
Yeah, I agree. Kevin and I could definitely use a Conrad sometimes. But
I know it.
yeah.
You, we recently, we always kind of do this kind of format where it's almost like I'm interviewing the person and that
Mhm.
person being Caleb, where I'm kind of leading the conversation. And recently for what was it, the XPW episode, we switched it up, and I was like, "This is amazing." I was like,
Yeah.
"You can just lead all the episodes from now on." Uh, and I thought he did a great job with it, and that made me
Yeah.
think. I was like, "Man, maybe we need a Conrad."
Yeah, actually, I really dug that episode. I listened to it recently.
It was great. I was
Yeah.
having, we as we just said, you've been doing this a long time, so the stress and the frustration that goes along with preparing one of these, and you got to be on it, especially if you're on
Right.
video.
Hmm.
I can be like, I love when I come on your show because I don't typically have to prepare very much. I got to have my notes together, of course. But honestly, you guys make it so easy. I could just not have my shit together and still come on there. I probably have done it at least once.
Yeah, and that's kind of like the fun of being a guest, you know. It's like, okay, I get to like I'm not in control of this thing. I mean, I'm just here for the ride.
Right,
It's the fun,
exactly.
you know.
So you know everything that goes into, kind of preparing one of these and recording it and all of that. So, yeah, it's always a situation where I would love to kind of do that, and normally I'm stressed out. And so in that episode, when we did the FMW episode, I was like having a blast.
Yeah.
I mean, I always have fun doing this, but it's like that
Hmm.
time it was just like the stress wasn't there, and it was just the fun,
Right.
you know.
Yeah. And
So,
that's
and
great.
and I really enjoyed that enjoyed that episode just in general. Like it's a cool topic. So the next thing that I want to talk about, uh, I'm kind of jumping around, but this is kind of in chronological order. Uh, they kind of talk about Dixie Carter a little bit in their discussions. So Kurt has an episode where he has two episodes where he kind of talks about this. He has one episode where he leads up to the day that he gets released from WWE. So that it kind of ends with him being released, and it involves everything leading up to him being released. He has another episode that covers the time period between the release and when he signed the deal with TNA. And in that episode, he talked about Dixie Carter and how it was such a transition to go from working for for WWE, which is that just kind of cold corporate machine, to working for TNA and Dixie's kind of approach where she seemed to very genuinely care about the talent and their well-being and um, you know uh, when you heard this about Dixie Carter, did it kind of affect the way that you see her? Did you have any preconceived notions about her?
Yeah, I did. And I was actually thinking about this while I was listening to this podcast. And the thought crossed my mind that, man, when it comes to basically every promoter, present company may be excluded, but when it comes to like every promoter, it's like you hear more bad about them than good. So it can be Tony Khan, Vince McMahon, Dixie Carter, Eric Bischoff, or it could be any of them really. And more times than not, you hear the bad before you hear the good. And like you hear a lot of rumors and stories and speculations for years and years, and you can walk away thinking that, okay, so these people are just bad, but in reality maybe these are just isolated bad experiences that are told over time, and they could probably be more good than bad. And I think that's probably it with Dixie. I think that I do think that we have to, at least to some degree, cut her some slack. Whether you don't like some of the creative decisions that were made, they have to remember that she, at that time wasn't really an accomplished wrestling booker or promoter. She was also kind of learning on the job, but trying her best, assumedly. Uh, but also, and I think it was Samoa Joe who mentioned, yeah, just the fact that a lot of people get confused with the on-screen personas versus who some of these people really are, and I think a lot of people have done that over the years. But no, I really think that that yeah, it was it was refreshing to kind of hear that from two guys who aren't just corporate shields, who aren't just lying to protect the integrity of somebody else. They're they have no reason to do that. So
Right. I mean, if nothing else, I mean, you got to remember Samoa Joe is under WWE contract.
that's true.
So it may have, and I don't see Joe looking at it like this, but
Hmm.
he totally could have been like, well, I mean, hell, if I throw Dixie Carter under the bus here, I might get some points with the old man,
Right.
and so he had no reason. He actually had every incentive not to have those kind words for her, which I thought was great. And you bring up a good point. I think there's a natural animosity between bookers and promoters and the talent just because of all of the carny shit that's kind of happened in pro wrestling over the years. And it's like when you initially start to work with somebody in the wrestling business, unless you have somebody who is just, you've just known them for years and they just highly recommend the person And even then, you always go in with it like, is this person going to screw me over?
Yeah.
You know, is this person going to do good business? And I don't blame either side for that, because so much of it has gone on in the past. I do think it's improving in the wrestling business, but it was, I agree with you entirely. It was great to hear somebody have that like positive kind of comment about somebody who was at the top like that, and who was running things in an environment where it had to have been chaotic at times, just due to the nature of the beast.
Right. Yeah, and it's also really easy when it comes to like promoters being the figurehead of these companies. It's really easy to just point the fingers at them when a lot of times they kind of they give responsibility to other people. They so it's not so much that while a lot of the times the buck does stop with them, uh maybe some of the attacks are unwarranted.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people, when they think about pro wrestling, they think about WWE.
Hmm.
And in WWE, as we know, Vince has his hands in everything, every
Yeah.
day, all day, every day. He lives it, breathes it. If he slept, he would sleep it. Um, but that's kind of the complicated part of it, right? Is
Hmm.
not everybody's Vince McMahon. Not everything works the way WWE works. I've really enjoyed hearing Kurt kind of talk about some of the ways that TNA was different, and probably still is. Also, really loved hearing Joe talk about the same thing. But when Kurt Angle signed with TNA, his first opponent going in was none other. They talk about it right here. That was Samoa Joe, and so when he comes over, this made a big splash in the wrestling world, because he was undoubtedly the largest free agent in the game at that time. The only other person that would have been that much, that big of a free agent was probably Brock Lesnar, and Brock Lesnar's initial run was nowhere near on the level of Kurt's. Also, Kurt was famous before he ever stepped into a pro wrestling ring. And Brock really wasn't, unless you follow like collegiate
Right.
wrestling, and I don't think there's a huge audience for that. What did you think about this being his first opponent?
Yeah, so this was interesting because I know that Kurt and Samoa have, a certain viewpoint the way they look at it, how they think that maybe they should have waited to kind of build up to those two competing against each other. But honestly, man, when I was a kid, I wasn't really that big into TNA. I was always kind of a WWE guy. And so when I hear that Kurt is going to TNA, and then I hear that, oh, they're doing Samoa Joe and Kurt Angle, like that really grabbed my attention right off the bat. So it really drew me in because even though I was just kind of a casual TNA fan, I still knew who Samoa Joe was. And I still knew how good he was, and I knew that he and Kurt would probably tear the house down. And so for them to start off like that was actually, I thought, pretty cool for someone like me to come in and see.
Yeah, and I mean, we knew each other way back then, and I can
Yes.
remember, I kind of got on the TNA bandwagon before you did, and I was always
Hmm.
like hard pitching it to you,
Yep.
like, oh my God, man, you got to see some of these X Division guys. You got to see AJ Styles. You got to see Christopher Daniels. You got to see Elix Skipper. You got to see James Storm. You just always just kind of, I was kind of pushing it on you, and I kind of remember now that you bring it up, this kind of being the thing where you were like, oh, okay, you know,
Yeah.
this has got my attention, and I think that happened for a lot of people. I mean, they talk about it in this episode. It kind of the height of TNA when they were on Spike TV, they were getting 2 million viewers.
Which is incredible,
I mean,
like
on a
compared to
Monday.
today. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, right now, I mean, there are times where WWE would kill for 2 million views.
Hmm.
And,
Absolutely.
and same with AEW. I mean, it's Raw just doesn't do that well in certain hours, and it's not competing with anybody. They were competing with WWE and doing really well. And
Yes.
and it's just it's crazy to think about 2 million viewers. Now their pay-per-view buys were never that great for a variety of reasons. But that's neither here nor there. Just the fact that they were getting those kind of ratings on a Monday night is, running head to head with Vince, is just insane to me.
Yeah, I mean that really is incredible when you think about it because it's something that you look back and can really appreciate and say, "Wow, that was really strong." But going back to that time, I guess a lot of people, myself included, didn't really see it that way because the only thing you had to compare it to was the original Monday Night Wars, and you're like, "Well, this is no Monday Night Wars." But looking back at it in comparison to now, like that's actually really incredible what they were able to pull off, and it is, and at least to a degree, due to Kurt Angle and what he brought to the table. He brought obviously another slate of talent, but he also brought a lot of fans and a lot of eyes to TNA as well.
Something that's interesting. And I recently listened to this episode where Kurt signed with TNA. He was treated very well there. He didn't give the exact number, but he said that when they reached out to him and he said he was interested, Dixie Carter called him and said, "All right, write down a number, and let us know what the number is." And he told him that what his number was. He said there was no negotiation, there was no anything. They said we'll fly up there and sign you tomorrow.
Wow. And not to get off topic or anything, but the more I think about it, like, and also not to kind of blow this out of proportion, but I think that Dixie signing Kurt is at least to some degree comparable to AEW signing, Brian Danielson or CM Punk because you're getting this huge name who a lot of people know and recognize, and now they're on your TV instead of the competitions.
It's a lot like the Bryan signing for sure. I don't
Yeah,
know if it compares to Punk because he had been off TV for 7 years, but
that's true.
Kurt Angle had not been off TV for that long. I think it was less than a year. I'm pretty sure
Yeah,
before he showed up, or at least the rumblings had started of him going over there because this is wrestling.
yeah,
And even back then, when the dirt sheets weren't as prevalent as they are now, we still like knew about it. We were kind of
right.
finding out about it. Um, so, you talked a little bit about them wanting to wait to do it and kind of build it. And of course, that's the way that pretty much any wrestler wants anything to go, right? Is it's always, well, if we're going to do this, we should build up to it and make this whole thing. And maybe that's probably true, right? Like, having been in the ring ourselves, that wrestlers love storytelling and we love to
Mhm.
sort of get into this situation where, we can have this big build up and this big blow off. But I think you have an excellent point that them just going straight into this, it sent a huge message out to the world, right? Like, no discredit to Sanjay Dutt, right? But if
Mhm.
Kurt's first opponent had been Sanjay Dutt or Eric Young, people would have turned the TV on and been like, I don't know who that is, and then they would have turned back,
Yeah,
you know. So,
and that is true. So there is a lot of power to having Samoa Joe and Kurt Angle go ahead and go at it. Yeah.
we're still jumping around a little bit here. They mentioned in this episode that Joe was actually Kurt's last Monday Night Raw opponent ever. What did you think about that? Did you know about that going in, or did you find out about that in the episode?
No, I found out about that in the episode. I think that's one of those things where, um, yeah, actually, yeah, I found out about that in the episode because previous to this, I had always thought that Kurt's last opponent was Baron Corbin, which I thought was a huge disservice to
It
Kurt.
it was his last opponent in WWE. He lost to them at the pay per view, but
Mm.
his last Raw match was against Joe.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Okay, that. Well, thank you for clearing that up. But no, I think that there's a lot to say about that because I also learned that not only was Joe Kurt's last opponent, but apparently Kurt got to pick, and he picked Joe, and I think that speaks very highly of Joe. I mean, if you weren't already sold on how incredible Joe is, then I mean, I can't think of very many higher accolades than having Kurt Angle pick you for your last match, for his last match.
Yeah, I mean, I've been a huge fan of his forever,
Yes.
and it's always really gratifying to see like the rest of the world find out what you knew already.
Right.
and it even comes down to like Joe. They didn't touch on this probably intentionally, but Joe getting released from the main roster, and like him Triple H having a new NXT contract to him the same day.
Yeah.
It's like, no, we can't let this guy go anywhere because they knew that he was going to end up on AEW immediately.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
And he would, and somebody that's that real is exactly something that AEW would have benefited from then and now, but especially at that time, because they didn't have at that time this serious built up heel that could go out there and was incredibly believable, because Samoa Joe is kind of like a Arn Anderson or a James Drake, or even like a Bryan Danielson to an extent, or a Brock Lesnar. It's like most people go into professional wrestling now knowing that it is staged, that it's a performance. But everybody I just named will make you wonder. They will make you doubt that.
Yeah.
It's all right. Well, and to quote James Drake, it's I can't convince you that pro wrestling is real, but I can convince you that I'm real.
Right.
And Joe is one of those guys that has that quality, and when you see him, you do not doubt anything about who he presents to the audience.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, man. And I think that's actually pretty uncanny of him. And it's ironic. I think it was on like my Facebook feed. For some reason, I had gotten a clip on my phone from a match between AJ Styles and Samoa Joe from back at like the 2018 Hell in a Cell match or pay-per-view. And I was like, well, as much as I really don't care to watch WWE product, I will watch and see how this match was because I didn't remember it. And even in 2018, Styles and Joe were incredible. And I was like, yeah, it was amazing. But just to speak to your point and tie it together, every single strike, every single blow that they hit each other with was so believable, probably because they were legit strikes. And
I was gonna say, well, let me pull the curtain back for you on that. They just beat the shit out of each other. Yeah.
It was awesome though. Yeah.
That match. I mean, every match they've ever had, just about.
Yeah.
Is incredible. I mean, and it's because they're both those guys that can get in the ring with somebody and take them to a different level.
Mm-hmm.
And so when they're both in there doing it to each other, it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
And they even actually talk about one of the matches that was on my top 5 matches of all time, the triple threat.
Triple threat. Yeah, I knew it.
Yeah, with Daniels and AJ and Joe. And Conrad is like, who did you like working with better, those guys or Kurt? And he's like, hands down, it was absolutely those guys.
No hesitation.
Right, and because it's exactly like what we were describing earlier about you being a guest on somebody else's podcast. It's like when he gets in there with Kurt, it's this, we have to go through all the motions, and he still enjoys it, but it's work, right?
Right.
And when he gets in there with AJ and Daniels, he's probably like, all right, so what's the finish? All right, cool, man. I'll see you guys out there. And that's
right.
And that's it, because they are both just such smooth workers, and really all he has to do is react to them, and it'll be amazing.
Yeah, and also like Joe said, he also just knew them and their work styles just so much more than how he knew Kurt's. But man, like it really does say a lot that working a triple threat match was easier or more fun than working a one-on-one match with somebody who is also extremely high caliber. Like that's insane.
Yeah. And something that I think speaks to Joe too is, it seems like he never had a negative attitude about Kurt coming into the company. It seems like he always was really enthused about it. And so, in any scenario of pro wrestling where it's like, oh, you're the top guy here, you're on an 18-month undefeated streak. All right, cool. Listen, we're going to bring in this guy who's never been here before, and he's going to beat you.
Mm-hmm.
Very few people in the wrestling business that have ever been at the level that Joe is at would react in a positive light to that and see the merit to the storytelling.
Right. Because I think for a lot of guys, I think even guys with somewhat good attitudes, I feel like they would respond with, I don't mind him beating me, but can we at least build up to him beating me? Like, but I mean, in the case of Joe here, that does say a lot about his character, and he even mentions this at one point about how he wasn't really concerned about his booking. He just wanted to make sure that somebody was always being booked well. And I was like, that really speaks a lot, because ego is a huge thing in wrestling, whether it be for good or for bad. Ego is a lot when it comes to pro wrestlers.
Yeah, I agree a lot. And, you know, Joe even talks about this too when he was starting to come in with WWE. It's like, I remember when they signed him because I had watched him live. I watched him wrestle Cedric Alexander within 3 months of the announcement that he was going to be coming to NXT. And I remember at the time the deal that he signed with them where he could still work indie dates. And it was unprecedented because he was keeping his name. He could still work indie dates. He was going to be on NXT, and like no one had gotten a deal like that. So I was like, clearly somebody over there, we know now that it was Triple H,
Right.
understood the value in this guy. But like they weren't completely sold that he was going to fit. And after working with the guy for like 3 months, they were like, yeah, we want you on a full-time deal.
Yeah.
And just as well as I do, 10 years ago, you and I sitting here discussing that Samoa Joe was going to be on Raw or SmackDown or whatever. Like that just seemed like a fanboy's like pipe dream.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It seems like something that would never happen. And especially under the name Samoa Joe, like if you go back 10, 15 years ago, even if he would have showed up on Raw or SmackDown, he would have been freaking Island Joseph, or
Yeah.
would have been something bad as Chili McFreeze or whatever.
It would have been awful. It would have
Yeah.
been some terrible, probably racist
Yes.
nonsense that would have not flown. But the fact that they let him keep his name, that he has trademarked, so
Right.
like they can't touch this without him.
Yeah.
And they hate that. They really hate paying royalties and things like that out to people because, Joe could retire tomorrow and live another 40 years, and Vince doesn't want to be paying royalties to this dude for 40 years.
Right.
And so that's kind of how, it was just so unbelievable that they saw that kind of value in him. And then for like the big wigs at the top to just be like, yeah, we're going to release this guy. He doesn't fit the product. Triple H to not even know about it, realize that it happened, and then be like, no, this is absolutely not going to happen because this guy's going to take his intellectual property that we just made worth millions of dollars, and he's going to take it to the competition, and we can't do anything because it's his IP.
Right.
And it's just that, and it seems like him and Triple H just have a great working relationship.
Yeah, it does. And not to get, too far off the topic there, but it does make you wonder about, ironically enough, the communication or lack thereof over at the WWE, the fact that Joe was released. And one could assume, unbeknownst to Triple H, that he was released until after it was already finalized. And then for Triple H to turn around and kind of course correct that, it kind of says a lot about different things. It says a lot about kind of the management situation at the E, and it also says a lot about, like you said, Joe and Triple H's relationship.
Yeah, agreed. What did you think about kind of hearing Kurt compare and contrast like wrestling with Shawn Michaels, who was probably his biggest opponent in WWE? At least I'm not going to argue with that because
Right.
It's my greatest match. It's the best match of all time to me. Him and Shawn at WrestleMania. Kind of comparing that to what I think Kurt even considers his greatest opponent in TNA, which would have been Samoa Joe.
Yeah, so like they had my full attention for the entirety of the episode, but when they mentioned Kurt and Shawn compared to Kurt and Joe, like my ears and eyes perked up even more because I never thought to make that kind of comparison. And I was like, how do you compare? Like, how do you judge that? But I think that what Kurt said, concerning the matter was pretty, pretty spot on. Like how they're both incredible, but they're both so different from one another. And that speaks to a lot of things. Obviously, it speaks to how good both Joe and Sean are, but it also speaks to the versatility of Kurt Angle and the fact that, yeah, he can truly work with anybody, and chances are to be a 5-star match.
Right. I mean, they were similar in the aspect of when Kurt's wrestling with Sean, it's always like the two conflicting styles. Like Sean is this entertainer,
Mm-hmm.
right? And he's quick and he's agile, and Kurt is a wrestler.
Yeah.
You know, he's ground and pound. He's on the mat. He's trying to break your ankle. You know, he's hitting you with all these technical like suplexes and things. He's using your own weight against you. So that compare and contrast of styles always, I really enjoyed seeing it play out on the screen. And
Mm-hmm.
then you get to TNA and he's in there with Joe, and it's really the same scenario almost. Now Kurt is more of the performer. He still
Right.
wrestles, of course. He's still a mat wrestler, but he's more showy because of his years in pro wrestling. And then Joe is all business. You know, there's
Yeah.
very little things that Joe was doing at this point in time, even later in his career, to be flashy. Everything you ever see Joe do is to win the match.
That's true.
You know, and that's one of my always been one of my favorite things about him. So it's almost like they, you know, there we had another contrast of styles that was kind of similar to the way that that Kurt and Sean were. It's just the roles were kind of reversed.
Yeah, that is true. And man, you mentioned that, but it sometimes it almost feels like a lost art. The art of trying to win a wrestling match, which is what Joe was always all about. And that's just another thing that made his matches just so believable and so real and gritty. Like it doesn't have to be pretty. It doesn't have to be a quote unquote finisher. If he hits you with something, if he catches you on something, he's intending for that to be it for you. And I just really love that about Joe.
Right. I mean, this whole idea that this is a legitimate contest and both people are trying to beat the other one.
Hmm.
It's incredible how such a simple thing over time just has kind of gradually washed away.
Right.
And so just doing that today does a lot for someone in the pro wrestling industry because you stand out. One of the things I want to talk about too, um, I loved this line because they talk about Joe being able to keep his name when he goes over.
Right.
And I think Conrad asked this, and Conrad's like, "So hey, were you surprised they let you keep your IP?" And Joe's like, "No, because that's what we discussed."
Yeah. Yeah.
You
I
know,
caught that.
I love
Yeah,
that line.
yeah, me too. And it's like I imagine Joe. He didn't say this, but I imagine that the conversation probably started there, or the conversation technically probably wouldn't start until after that had been resolved. Because I don't see Joe coming in under a different name. And and again, it does speak to to the credit of Triple H, how Triple H understands things from a wrestler's perspective, whereas maybe Vince doesn't. So we already discussed how Vince probably wouldn't let Samoa Joe come in under his own name. He'd probably change it, but with Triple H, he got it,
Right.
and he understood the value. And then when you hear about the merch sales of Samoa Joe, it's like, yeah, this was totally worth it.
Yeah, yeah. Triple H says you had number two merch sales, and Joe's like, for NXT. He says no, for the whole company.
Yeah,
And it was probably like the New Day or John Cena or somebody that was
right,
number one. It was like some huge star, and it's like this dude's been on NXT for a week,
right,
and he's already selling all this merch. I mean, because his brand is good. I mean, he's always been so good about his branding. He's always been somebody who paid attention to that stuff, and isn't going to let them put out like a janky Samoa Joe shirt or whatever. So I always enjoyed that about Joe, and I think WWE, especially Triple H, realized that there was already value in that because it would have been similar to if they had brought in AJ as like BT stylish or some shit like
right,
that.
right.
Just some nonsense like great value version,
Yes,
and I think AJ, if anybody was going to pave the way for them to sort of do this, it had to be him because he's just undeniably, you know,
right.
in my opinion, and I got Stone Cold backing me up. He probably is the best doing it right now.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And it's just so interesting because historically speaking, WWE has a credit of pretending that nobody knows who these guys are.
Right.
And yeah, so it's been a real breath of fresh air to see guys come in and be able to use the names that they've had for years because there's a huge fan base that already knows and loves them under those names.
Yeah. Well, man, before we wrap it up here, do you have any other thoughts or anything on the episode as a whole?
Uh yeah, so I really wish that like honestly, I wish we could have gotten like more or part two because I know that there's so much more that these guys have gone through and that they could have discussed and maybe they didn't get into. I really dug how they talked about um, the headbutt between
Yes.
Samoa Joe and Kurt Angle. How Kurt busted Joe open with that vicious headbutt, and it's funny because like I remember seeing that years ago and thinking, oh man, like they really went for it. Like that was planned. Like yeah, that was great. And then and then understanding that no, of course it wasn't. Like he got hard weighed,
Yeah,
and it
of
was
course.
yeah, and like that it was incredible just to see how much Kurt was into it because not saying that Kurt would, but at that point he's probably in a position where if he wanted to, he could probably phone it in a little bit, or maybe he wouldn't have to go so hard, be so intense. But he was, and he did, and it obviously worked all the better for it.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that they talk about in a different episode when WWE put out that statement after he got released, and they said, that he was unstable and that he was an emotional wreck or whatever. Kurt did not bash them. He didn't, um, you know, try to really deny any of that, even at the time when it happened. But Kurt put out his own statement and said, listen, everything I've ever done, I've been passionate about. Every match I've ever had, I've gone out there and I've put 100% of my mind and my body into making sure that I had the best performance possible, that I delivered every single time. He said, and, I don't plan to ever lose that work ethic. And I loved that he did that, and I think that he remained true to that statement because at no point in TNA do you ever really see Kurt half-assing it. I mean, the man did another moonsault off of a cage like 10 years after the first one.
Right.
And that Six Sides of Steel is no joke, man.
Oh, I bet. Yeah. It didn't. It never looked like a joke. I guess let me ask you this. Joe was asked at a certain point, like, was that what he considered to be like, I guess his favorite era, like the golden era of TNA, like around that, I guess between that like '07 to like '10 ish run, maybe a few years after that. What would you consider to be like the golden era of TNA?
Well, I mean, it's obviously that point in time, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I think so. Joe had the belt from 2006 to 2008.
Hmm.
The main event Mafia thing, was like 2009 to 2011. We've actually covered some TNA pay per views and stuff from that era on this show,
Hmm.
so go check those out for sure. I would consider 2006 around that time to around 2011 probably the golden era of TNA because for me, for somebody who was like really into it, it kind of started with like the original like Six
Yeah.
Sides of Steel matches and stuff. But that was kind of what started to get like really like hardcore wrestling fans into it, and picking it up. I remember Jeff Hardy going over there.
Right.
I remember
Yeah.
DDP.
Christian. Yeah.
Yeah, well, Christian was way later.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Huh. Yeah.
I remember DDP going over there and wrestling Jarrett for the title, and they did a bunch of stuff, man. They brought Macho Man in at some point.
I forgot
Um,
about that.
yeah, he wrestled a tag match. I think it was like him, Sting, and AJ Styles against like the NWO, or they couldn't say that, but
See
whatever.
that sounds made up, but yeah.
It's real, yeah. It completely happened. I promise. You can go look it up. This here's one thing I will mention. Since the WWE Network sucks,
Right.
And since now that it's on Peacock,
Hmm.
and everyone hates it, AEW doesn't really have a network. But I will tell you this: Impact Plus, dude, not a sponsor. I'm just pitching them because I like the product. For the price, it is such a good deal. I mean, I think it's $7.99.
Oh, damn.
And they have the whole library. I mean, the entire library on there, and it's easy to navigate, and it looks good. I mean, I really Stovall talked me into getting it forever ago because we were gonna do, I think, Sacrifice 2009, and then I just kept it because there's so much good wrestling from that era. So, if
Yeah.
anybody's looking for like a back catalog, or maybe you missed some of these golden years, I would definitely say check that out. And it's not Impact's not bad today, but it's like it all feels very B League because all the big stars are gone. You
Yeah,
know.
yeah. Unfortunately, that is kind of the vibe that you get from it. Um, I guess let me ask you this also, just kind of pick your brain. Which Kurt Angle run do you prefer more, his WWE run or his TNA run?
So I'm glad you asked that because I meant
Yeah.
to talk about this anyway, and it just slipped my mind as it
Mm.
does. Kurt says that he had a better TNA run than his WWE run.
Yeah.
It is hard for me to agree with that. I do agree with it from like I guess like a how he was booked standpoint, and like him making all these stars and getting to work with a wide variety of talent. That's easy, I think, to look at. But it's hard for me to look at that and think about like the King of the Ring match with Shane and how iconic
Oh,
that
yeah.
was, and how two people, a guy that really wasn't a wrestler and a guy who was like the most straight laced collegiate Olympic wrestler, had a better death match than anyone else.
Right.
You know, uh, that was amazing. His WrestleMania match with Shawn will forever, live as probably my favorite match of all time. I mean, something else could come along and beat it, but I'm not holding my breath. Have been
Right.
dead so many times over. Um, him and Brock at 19,
Yes.
him and Eddie at 20, just all pretty much every time him and Eddie Guerrero were anywhere near each other.
Yes.
Him being in the alliance with Austin and all their little kind of backstage stuff they used to do, man, it's just all his stuff with Undertaker. It's hard because on that same page he has all the stuff with Joe, all the
Right.
stuff with AJ. He had some matches with Daniels. They had the like Battle of the Moonsaults. They
You're right.
his work. He worked with James Storm a bit. Some
That's
of the
right.
stuff he did with Sting over there. It's hard, man. His stuff with Christian. I mean, I thought the main event Mafia too, just in general,
Hmm.
was such a cool thing. I mean, they did a great job with it. It's hard for me to pick one, man. What about you?
Man, that's such a difficult question, man. Like, because again, I was always more of a WWE guy. I was always, a team WWF/E when they had the Monday Night Wars. I was always on Team E, when TNA was really giving them some competition. Um, but even with that, though, it'd be foolish of me to ignore all the amazing matches and moments that Kurt has had in TNA. I mean, because again, they were so good, it got my attention and it got me to watch constantly. So it's tough, man. It's tough. I understand Kurt's viewpoint. I may have to say that for me personally, I think I maybe enjoy his WWE run maybe a tad bit more. Um, if for no other reason, like as much as I hate to say it, sometimes the spectacle can maybe overshadow other things that we don't get to see that could influence Kurt's decision as to which is better.
Yeah, I agree, man. I mean, it's probably easier for Kurt to look at it that way,
Mhm.
but I think that I think definitely uh, there's probably, as fans, I think I have to see that. I have to agree with you. I have to see the WWE run as the better one, just because of how much, if nothing better than how much attention was on it.
Yeah.
So Well, man, I really, really appreciate you joining me for this. This was kind of out of the blue, but the second that I listened to this episode, I knew I wanted to talk about it. And Caleb and I's schedules have been both really crazy lately, so I was glad that you and I were able to sit down and talk about this. And I knew you would have a unique perspective on it. Let it one more time before we get out of here. Let everybody know where they can find the Superhero Homies podcast.
You can find the Superhero Homies podcast at basically wherever podcasts are found. So that is Google Play, Spotify, Apple Podcast, iHeartRadio. Yeah, so wherever you guys listen to your podcast on your mobile device or even on your computer, you guys can hear us. They were also on Blueberry and all sorts of other podcasting platforms as well. So check us out. We upload weekly, and we have an entire back catalog of awesome content that we know all you nerds would enjoy.
You heard it, man, and I am plugging your show on this one all the time because, as I say all the time, and it's true, it's damn true. That is my favorite podcast on the Citadel. With that being said, of course, this has been an Evolved Review.